Once again, to prepare our afternoon, we asked this following question. Why is history relevant? With all the answers received, one of them stood out. I have the pleasure of introducing our guest.
Her love of languages, cultures, and history is directly related to her experiences living in Belgium, England, and Canada, as well as the influences of her Canadian mother and French and Israeli father. Recently, she has been a part of an oral history project that has helped preserve the stories and memories of Holocaust survivors and veterans for future generations. So I'll invite Arielle up to the stage to share a little bit about her project.
Bon après-midi, good afternoon, everyone. So, how does one begin to describe the importance of history? I could tell you that history allows us to gain a deeper understanding of our past. I could tell you that history paves the way for a greater understanding of our future. And while this is all true, history for me is about more than just this. I have been so fortunate to take part in the Crestwood Preparatory College Oral History Project, which is a way of bringing history beyond the limits of our textbooks. The Oral History Project is a series of documented videos of Holocaust survivors, war veterans, and other witnesses of war and violence, with the goal of ensuring that these stories will be passed down to future generations and will never be forgotten. History is a very personal experience for me. The first interview that I conducted as a part of this project was of my grandmother, a child of the Holocaust in France. Having had the opportunity to film and document her story has given me the chance to not only gain insight into her story, but it's allowed me to further develop mine. Previously, she had never told me about this painful part in her life. I only knew that it was much too difficult a subject to talk about. After I listened, suddenly her story had become mine, her feelings had become my own, and I have had a more personal relationship and connection with her than before. My grandmother was only a very young child, living in France at the beginning of the Second World War. And she survived only because she was somehow taken in by strangers and then sheltered in an underground orphanage. My grandmother said to me, "C'est une histoire absolument typique. C'est mon histoire, mais c'est aussi l'histoire de nombreuses familles."
So it's my story, the story of many families.
That it was her story, but it's also the history of many other families. I think of all those people, and I think of all those stories that have never been told, and I have a determination now not to let these lives and these voices be forgotten. Another important aspect of history is remembrance. I recently conducted an interview with Mr. Charles Scott Brown, who was a veteran that fought on D-Day. He was the first veteran I have ever spoken to, and probably one of the last that I ever will speak to about his experiences on the beaches of Normandy. Listening to his story reminded me of my grandmother's, and I realized the interconnection of the two. Whenever I think about my grandmother's story, I remember the lives of the soldiers who helped to liberate Europe. And I'm always aware during these interviews that without these soldiers, without them marching onto those beaches in Normandy, my grandmother would not be here, and I certainly would not be here. We all have a shared history, and I only have a history because of the survival of my grandmother and because of military veterans like Mr. Charles Scott Brown. The times my grandmother has shared her story with me, she speaks emotionally of a brother who was killed during the Holocaust. As she was so young, she can only remember her brother now by a name and a number indicated in Convoi 68 du 10 février 1944, a name and a number amongst hundreds of others. Whenever I hear about her brother, it makes me realize the importance of remembering. History is about remembering not just the people that you know and the people who have lived to share their stories, but it's about remembering those who have not had their voices heard. While I do talk about history in a very personal way, how it has helped me, how it has given me such a deep connection when I hear the lives and the stories of people who have witnessed so much, there is another important aspect. When Holocaust survivors, war veterans, and other witnesses of war and injustice sit down with me and see that high school students actually want to sit down with them for 2, 3, or even 4 hours and listen to their testimonies, it's as if something magical happens, and we all become a part of something much larger than ourselves and our own individual lives. As part of the Oral History Project, I have also been fortunate enough to listen to a number of Indigenous people speak about their experiences and histories. Last year, my school hosted a human rights symposium called Towards Reconciliation in November. I was privileged to be able to interview and record some of their stories. I was able to listen to the history of Thomas Norton, a member of the Saugeen First Nation and a survivor of the 60s scoop. He spoke to us about his experiences with reconciliation and discrimination. I was also able to conduct an interview with a woman named Edsby, an inspirational music artist from Winnipeg, who connects her music with her Irish and Cree roots. Through her music, she explores social activism and Indigenous issues. All the men and women we met on that day had their own approach to how we should reach the national goal of reconciliation, and many agreed that by doing this, by having students sit down and listen to the stories of history is a good start. To me, history is about so many things, and it's about all of these stories. It's about remembering the past, it's about making connections with people, it's about respecting others, but most importantly, it's about listening and coming together as a community and sharing our stories. Thank you.
I think there's no doubt in our mind why this submission caught the eye of so many at Canada's history. Thank you, Arielle. That was beautiful, so heartfelt, and I think many of us in this room have had some of our deepest connections to history through oral history interviews with people in our families and communities, and that was very, very touching. So merci beaucoup. Thank you.